things were going well for government forces, but Azadi was telling a more balanced version, and people could see, and they had relatives in this place. So the stuff that Radio Azadi was reporting, they could find out very quickly was in fact the truer version of events out there.
Umit, certainly this question goes to you because of your background as a newsman. What role did foreign radios play in your life as a journalist in Tajikistan?
First of all, when I started Asia Plus, I have to say that the Tajik authorities, they considered and still consider radio and TV as strategically important for their security. That's why they still control this field. It goes for foreign broadcasting as well as a local independent radios.
Right.
And for example, it was very simple to register a newspaper, for example, in Tajikistan, but it was impossible, and it's still impossible to get a license for radio broadcasting or TV broadcasting for private company. And for example, Asia Plus was waiting for 4 years to get its own license. But when we started, I was lucky enough to get an internship on Radio Liberty in Prague during a couple of months, and it was the best experience that time. And when we started our activity as Asia Plus, first as a news agency and newspaper, and then FM radio, we always listening and monitoring news and features coming from Radio Azadi, Tajik service of Radio Liberty, because I would say that this source of information, perhaps the main one for Tajik audience.
And I would like to join and to say that, in my view, on this issue is fundamentally educational. When you're asking why authorities in Central Asian countries, or let's say Russia and all post-Soviet states, they are about their, let's say, a very questionable attitude to the radio and to any sources of information, especially if they are diverse. I'm saying that it's fundamental educational because all these leaders from all era, even young generation of leaders, they simply don't know what to do with the diversity of information, with the diversity of sources information. Why? Because their education and their knowledge is mostly, let's say, dogmatic, and they simply don't know how to process that information, how to deal with very challenging information, and how to just among this diverse source of information offer their own version of reality. But also we have the second phase of this phenomenon. For instance, we can see that unfortunately the countries of Central Asia, after 25 years of independent development, didn't yet get the fact-based journalism, investigative journalism. For instance, in my home country, especially in Kyrgyz language, journalism, it's not fact-based, it's gossip-based, it's rumor-based information and journalism, and therefore it's very difficult to trust the sources of information. Therefore, you can see that scholars on Central Asia or international radio or TV programs, they are rarely cite the sources of information in a Kyrgyz language about what's going on in Kyrgyzstan. Therefore, I think it will take time, and if education improves, probably it will be possible to fix this problem.
Thank you very much, Vakit. As I said at the beginning, that UNESCO celebrates February 13 as the Radio Day. When UNESCO picks up something to celebrate, for some reason it makes me wonder whether this object is diminishing, and this is an effort to save it. This leads me to another question. How did the place and role of radios change it with the rapidly changing world? We will continue discussing this and many other questions shortly. Hey everyone, before we get into the second part of the show, just a quick reminder that if you really like Majlis podcast, there's a real chance that you will also like my other radio show that's called Gandhara Podcast. The show discusses latest developments in Pakistan and Afghanistan from local perspective. And the podcast is published in every second week on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Gandhara website. It's a totally must-follow discussion for foreign policy nerds with interest in the region. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast, we are talking about place and role of foreign radios in Central Asia. Discussing the subject with me are Bakit Bashimov, former member of the parliament in Kyrgyzstan. Currently, he teaches at the Northeastern University. Umid Babakhanov, who is the founder of Asia Plus, the first and the biggest independent news organization in Tajikistan. Bruce Pannier is joining us, who is the editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog called Kishlak Awazi. I'm Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, gentlemen. Now, as I just mentioned, world is rapidly changing. So does the habit of people as well as their needs. How has this affected role and place of radio, the traditional place of radio in their day-to-day life, especially talking about your country, Umid?
You know, in Tajikistan, I think in all post-Soviet countries now, it's for foreign broadcasters like Radio Liberty or BBC or Deutsche Welle or others, Voice of America. It's I would mention one very important dilemma which all of them are facing now. If they have to have their offices, correspondent bureaus within the countries, and be under certain control by local governments, or they stay abroad and broadcast from abroad and be more independent. If you understand what I mean,
right.
When you have your representation, for example, in the country, local government has a power to somehow to make a pressure on you. Don't touch this topic. Don't touch this topic. I understand desire of chiefs of this representation, these radios, to keep their offices inside the country, but in this case, they limit their freedoms to cover that or this topic. But they have more opportunities to get more news, having more correspondence inside. But on the other hand, having the offices inside the countries, they limit their possibilities to cover some sensitive topics.
So, Bakit, Kyrgyzstan has been an interesting case. I hear that presidents, political leaders often heard citing news from Azadtik, which is our Kyrgyz service. What do you recall about the place of radios from your time in the administration? How much would you rely on them, and what purpose did it serve for the administration, the ones who are ruling the country?
It goes to the authorities of Kyrgyzstan during different times, during regime of Akayev and after Bakiyev, and today during the reign of Atambayev. I can say that the dominating trend is of authorities in Kyrgyzstan is to use this radio as a tool of convenience. If they get the positive information about themselves, they prefer to favor this information, even they refer to the sources of this information. If they just collide with, let's say, non-positive information about themselves, they tend to attack. And you can see that recently in Kyrgyzstan, when they're trying to marginalize Azadtik radios due to, let's say, non-positive attitude to what is doing administration of a president. And but when you ask the question about, let's say, the future, I think that if people in Kyrgyzstan will get, let's say, more access to the internet, and if it would be not so costly due to the proliferation of independent radio stations and the possibility for people to make their own podcasts and video programs, it can change, let's say, information area really even unimaginable way. And let's see what will happen in the next years. And because today in Kyrgyzstan, close to 30% only population has access to information. It's not enough, of course.
From your experience or news that you hear from your country, and I just want to get your opinion about the same question that I gave to Omid, how did the digital era affected the traditional role of radios in your society?
Of course, media landscape has been changed since during this last years. Today we have internet, mobile phones, and satellite broadcasting, and so on. So authorities still try to control media, but it becomes more and more difficult for them because today you can download podcasts, you can use your phone, and you can get news from, for example, Radio BBC or Radio Liberty to your phone, and you can read it on internet. Authorities still try to control. For example, they block websites, but due to new technologies, you can avoid all this blockage and you can get access to that news, which is very good.
Yeah, let's take Bakit's opinion on this. Bakit, in your country, Kyrgyzstan, how did the digital era affected the traditional role of radios in your country?
Yes, you can see that today when a lot of young people, they are releasing to a public their own podcasts, their own video messages, and in social networks, they are sharing this information. And therefore, in this situation, for the traditional journalism based on radio or TV, it's difficult to compete with them. Therefore, as I said, if they just pay more close attention to the quality of education, to the just best training, probably they will survive. Otherwise, for them to compete with the just increasing number of bloggers and people who are involved in this media, will be very, very difficult.
Bruce, effect of rapidly changing world to the radios. With the changing world, radios are obviously changing with it. Talking about our own Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, there has been a dramatic changes over the past several years, and you have seen these changes within. Though changes are dramatic, radio remains still one of our main platforms. What is your thinking about this strategy?
Well, obviously, you have to move with the times a little bit. And, of course, as you just mentioned, we started taking the internet a lot more seriously about 15 years ago and posting stuff up on there. And we're also moving into, I think all the services do their own videos, too, and produce their own video shows. That said, we've also found out, as we've been moving along, that I'll use Tajikistan as an example here, that although that's very good that you're on the internet, and although you can put printed text up there and put videos and everything like that, it comes down to the provider of the of the source for your internet. And the Tajik authorities have been very good at shutting down and blocking sites when there's some sensitive issues in play in the country. It usually happens before elections, not just in Tajikistan, but again, using Tajikistan as an example, when there's unrest like there was in the Rasht, in the Gorge a few years ago, they just shut down the internet and blocked everything out. Kazakhstan's done the same thing. Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan try continually to do that. They're getting better at filtering stuff, but then we found out that radio really does still have a place. That it's not obsolete, because you can turn off the internet, you can block websites, but it's a lot harder to jam radio signals from coming in. So there still is a need to have the radio as well as the newer technologies.
Good points, Bruce. As Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in 2016, I was just looking into our statistics. We reached to 27 million adults per week, and 10% of which is coming from Central Asia. And only in Kyrgyzstan, our Kyrgyz service reaches to 36% of the population per week, though it is various platforms, obviously, but radio remains as one of the main platform of distribution. It shows that while the world is changing, the role of radio as a radio remains crucial in Central Asia. Bakit, why is this?
Because, as Bruce said, radio is still effective sources of information, and how it reaches people, how it touches their way of thinking is really still very effective. And I think that it will still, of course, for radio, it will be increasingly difficult to compete with new communication technologies. And therefore, here I see the problem of the quality of journalism based on radio.
We are approaching to end of our discussion today, looking into future. So what future do you see in your country for radios? Just briefly, if you can.
I would say that the role of foreign radio stations, foreign broadcasters today is getting even more and more important, even more maybe important than in Soviet era, because we see that the situation is getting worse and worse in some of our countries, and in such hostile environment. For example, in Tajikistan, it's almost impossible today to express some critical materials about the government, about the situation. That's first factor, and second, we know that most of post-Soviet audience is under great influence of Russian state media, and in such conditions, I think that role of Western media, and in particular radio, is crucially important.
Mm-hmm. Bucket?
You said that your radio reaches 37%.
36% of the adult population per week in Kyrgyzstan.
Yes, 36. And you can see that it is less than 50%. And it's an indication that you have a lot of space for the development. And therefore, how to just reach more people, it is one of the interesting questions. And of course, you'll see the increasing competition between different types of radio. Of course, as Umid said, you'll see the increasing influence of Russian world radio. And but anyway, people will have chance to compare, and therefore, if Radio Liberty, Voice of America, and local radio stations will just develop better, will be in a better position to compete with other sources of information. Anyway, I prefer not to demonize, let's say, negative influence of some biased radio programs, let's say from Russia, but say it's about diversity, and it's up to the people to make choice. Thank you.
When talking about Central Asia, one thing is also important to bear in mind is that all 5 Central Asian countries regarded as a not free societies in Freedom House's annual Freedom Index, which means independent news in whatever form it is coming to Central Asia is vital for the people, and it will remain so, it looks like, from the situation in the region going forward. So, Bruce, final point from you before to end the debate.
2 things to mention. One, when there's problems in any of these countries, our listenership always goes up. When there's something really, whatever, not necessarily emergency situation, but when there's something very, very important, it can be security problems, it can be elections, things like that. Our listenership goes up right away. The other thing is that even though most of the governments don't like that we broadcast in there and that we provide information to their population, there are always people in the government officials who secretly listen to our programs themselves to find out what's going on, because of course they know better than anyone that state media is not covering the truth, and we hear from these people every now and then that said, yes, I do listen to your program, and I appreciated getting other facts that we weren't giving in our own country. So there's 2 reasons why radio is still going to be important for the people of the region and even officials in the government.
Thank you very much for insightful comments, Bruce Pannier, editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog, Kishlock Owazi. Also, Bakit Bashimov, former member of parliament in Kyrgyzstan, currently teaches at the Northeastern University, and Umid Babakhanov, founder of Asia Plus, the first independent news organization in Tajikistan, for your time in thoughts and during today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you. And thank you. And this is it from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia podcast. Until next week, bye-bye.